Well, hello to day 4 of class. As promised, we are going to do some Christmas stuff today. I'm going to do one of our Christmas cards and then practice a little bit of clouds later, which I didn't get to yesterday. So I think you're going to enjoy this one. It's the one, it'll wind up probably being a variation because they're never all the same, or exactly the same. But it will be a variation of the one that's running on the ad that everybody saw when they signed up. So that is what we're doing today. It's got 4 pine trees. I posted it today so you can look at it if you need to. So if you're looking at your live towards the top of the screen, you can scroll down and look at the image that I uploaded, or you can download it into your computer. You can print it off, whatever you want to do. But anyway, we are ready to go with that one. And first of all, we are going to wet our space. We're going to be using the rose, the violet, the ultramarine blue, and then our gray color that we have been mixing this week with a little ultramarine and some black. If you do decide to continue painting, I highly recommend getting Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is a wonderful color that I love. It's great for clouds, it's great for water, scenery, shadows. It's just a really nice, kind of a neutral, attractive looking grayish blue color. They have a neutral Payne's Gray also that doesn't have the blue tint, and that's okay too. I actually have both of them in my set because sometimes I'm in the mood for one and the other. So I will start at the top with a little bit of ultramarine and violet mixed together. Forgot to spray my tray and make sure I had a little water in here, so I'm not working with dry paints. Now, because I pre-wet my paper, you're going to want a little extra pigment on here because otherwise it's just going to look too watery once it dries. And we are going to do a couple of different colors here. So we're starting with the blue. I happen to be doing blue at the top on this one. It's sort of a violet-y blue because I mixed the violet with it. And then we're going to get just the violet and go in the middle here a little bit. Maybe a little bit of pink, rose. Give it just some interest. The darker your sky is, the more obvious your stars are. That's the reason we really do want to sort of darken up this sky area, or we're not going to see our stars. So we do want this to be a little bit darker so that we can see our stars, and that's a lot easier to do now. At the beginning, if you try to do a different layer, then you can't do the star effect that I'm going to teach you. I'm stopping 3/4 of the way down because that's where our land is going to be. I probably need to wet that just again, just to make sure it's being smooth, a smooth transition. I'm not going all the way to the edge on mine, but you can if you want to. A little more pink over here, just to give that sky a little interest. And when we bring that down into our lower shadows, it's going to look really cool. I'm still going to make it just a little bit darker at the top there. Usually the sky is a little darker towards the top, it gets lighter towards the horizon. So if you want realistic skies, that's usually a good way to go about it. Darker near the top, lighter near the horizon. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. We're going to let it dry for just a couple. We're not going to blow dry it. We're just going to let it dry on its own. If we blow dry it, we can't do the next step. Now some people like to splash salt, but the problem with doing salt for skies is it doesn't really look like snow. And we want it to look like either stars or snow, one or the other. And salt does not really do that in the sky. Because of the effect that it creates. It's just a little bit different. So while this is drying just ever so slightly until it loses the really glossy effect that it has going now. Let me move my light and see how glossy that is right now. If I take it off, if I put the light back on it, you can see how glossy that water is. And we want that to calm down a little bit. You can even raise it and sort of let the water run down a little bit so that you don't get a puddle right there where it's folding, because then that won't dry and the rest of it will. And I usually move my paper around a lot while I'm painting because I'm trying to move that water around so I don't get puddles. Okay, I'm looking for my most pointy, smallest brush. If you can dig through your brushes and find your very smallest number 1 or 0. This is a 0 right here. See, a very fine point. Well, I'll put it down in where you can see it. There we go. It's losing its gloss over here on this section, so I'm going to grab a little bit of water. I'm going to make sure that there's no water. If a drop of water falls, it's going to make a mess. So right here where it's still wet, I'm not going to touch it, but over here it's kind of lost its gloss. So I'm going to put a little drop of water there. And as that water spreads a little bit, it makes a star. Not too much. If you put too much, then it kind of does the wrong thing. Like that one was probably a little too much. See how big that is? Didn't really mean to do that. And we will practice the trees before we get to the tree part. But this part is fairly simple. So I thought we could get this started, and while it dried, we'll practice the trees before we try to do that. Your brush is just a little bit wet, but not very. This is too wet. You can see that did that. The tree will probably cover that anyway. I'm not worried about it. Just putting a tiny, ever so slight bit of water there, and the water will naturally move the paint because the paint is still a little bit wet. You can lift it later, but you get the cool star effect if you do this now. Lifting later, you'll get like a little circle or whatever, but you won't get this little star effect that you get by putting a little water in it when it's at this stage where it's just barely starting to lose the gloss and the shininess on the paper. That's where you can do this right here and get these sort of star or snowflake or whatever. I think these are the stars and the snowflakes are what we paint on later with the white. I kind of like these being the stars because I think they have that sort of shape to them. Now you can do this with all sorts of different colors. You can do a really, really dark blue. I did one of those. Really, really dark blue background. And these stars look really pretty cool on that. In this lighter part, you can't see them as well. Partly because it's drying, but you're not going to be able to see that anyway. So while the stars are drying, I'm going to grab that same color, and I'm just going to maybe a little more pink and violet. Just sort of, I didn't wet this, you notice, because I want it to look like shadows from snow. Okay. I'm smoothing. I see a line right there, and I'm just sort of smoothing that line into this. I don't like that line at the bottom of that. You can put a little bit of water on some edges and make them smooth. You can keep it all sharp, whatever you want. You don't have to be super specific when you're talking about snow. You're just putting in a little bit of shadow. You don't have to be super detailed, I guess is the word I'm trying to look for. There doesn't need to be a great deal of detail here, just a little bit to sort of hint that there's blacks and whites, and when we put the trees in, that'll make a lot more sense. I'm going to zoom in on the star a little bit. You can see the stars, they're looking fairly star-like at this point. Fade back. I have new software, by the way, so it looks like the colors are coming through a lot better this time. Just got some different software to work with. Okay, we're going to let that dry for a minute, and while it dries, I want to practice with you these trees that are going to be our next step. So we'll practice a little bit. There it is. This is only 90-pound watercolor paper, so it's not really my usual fare, but get this out of the way. Okay. So for the trees, you could try this. I don't think it's going to work with this, to be honest with you. The sponge works great for bigger trees, but these are smaller trees because otherwise we can't fit very many of them. So I recommend a round brush. This is a number 4. So a 3 or a 4 is fine. Let's see here, I'm trying to use the same brush as you have. This is a, yeah, looks like the number came off, but it looks like it's a 3 because it looks a little bit, just barely smaller than the one I just showed you. So if we take some of this Prussian blue, which we really haven't played with yet, but let's assume that we have a tree right here, and I didn't make a straight line because I did that's on purpose. I don't want a straight line right there, okay? So let's assume that that's the top of the tree. We're just going to make a few dots so that we know that's where it starts and that's where it ends, okay? Take your brush and just kind of go to one side and to the other side a little bit and to this side a little bit. We're going to mix some black with this because it needs to be darker. And then we're leaving a lot of white because remember, this is the snow-covered tree. So we're leaving a lot of white areas. We're just going back and forth. Not exactly the same distance. Some branches are longer, some are shorter. Some go all the way across. Some just a little ways. And as you work down, you're getting progressively larger. Or wider, I guess is the term we're looking for. Remember, keep it dark. Your paints don't want to be real watery. But the basic gist is you're just going back and forth, back and forth, leaving some little white holes where the snow might be. And then when you get to the bottom, you're kind of bringing it out like almost like a little skirt. If you've ever seen a pine tree in the snow, this is what they look like. They got like this little skirt going on underneath. So there's a little pine tree, okay? And then we're going to do another one right next to it. Remember, nice and dark, because we're going to cover parts of it with snow, and so the rest of it needs to look like it's in shadow, you know? So So practice a smaller one right next to it. Just some dots to show where the top is and where the bottom is. Maybe he's a little more in the distance, so you might add a little bit of water to your color just so it's not quite as dark, because he is further back. Maybe the snow is in the way and stopping him from getting as much darkness. So he will be just a hair lighter. This is more watery, so it will dry lighter, but it is watery, so you can't tell that it's much lighter. But I did add water to it. So it's got a little bit more of a gray look. Try not to be perfectly even straight across from each other. Remember to vary it a little bit. Okay, and because he's further back, he can't come down the same distance, right? Otherwise he'd be, next to him. So we're going to keep him a little bit further back. And further back, by that I'm trying to say he's higher up on the paper. He can't be the same. If he was right next to him, then he would need to be either a baby or the same size. So now let's pretend we've got one way out in the distance. So I'm going to water this down just a little bit more. Now I don't have to do as much detail for the ones way out, because they're way out there. So it's just very basic. These guys they're way in the distance, and we're going to have a couple of those in this picture because they sort of fade into the background. You don't have to do much to those. You're just sort of hinting at that shape. And they're very light because they're way back there. So hopefully that'll help with your trees. Okay. When we do the whites on them, you'll see that's pretty easy. You take your white and we just put the snow on top, because of course this has a background behind it, so we'll just put the white on it to cover those spots in the snow, and then we'll put some snowflakes on it here and there. And when we do that with our white, it will look like the tree is a snow-covered tree with snow falling. So it'll look pretty cool. You'll like it when it's done. Okay, so now we're going to get back to our Christmas card, which should be fairly dry by now, if I did it right. Okay, that looks pretty dry. So back here in the background, I'm trying to decide. I don't think I like that particular color for this one. It might be good for another, but we're not going to use the Prussian blue for this particular bunch of trees. So I like to wipe out my trays before every card, in case you didn't notice. I keep those colors in there while I'm doing a card, but when I'm done with it, I wipe it out because I'm not using the same mixes. So since I'm not going to use that Prussian blue, I'm going to get it out, or I might accidentally dip into it and turn something a funky color that I don't like. So up here where we have this sort of gray that we mixed, I'm going to grab some of that gray, and we're going to put in some of these. I think I want to moisten this ever so slightly. See if I still have a little bit of water on my brush. Just ever so slightly moisten this. This is not shiny, you can tell. It's not glossy. I'm just barely putting any water on there just to sort of make these fade back. These are way back there, and I don't want them to be detailed because they're way back there. We'll probably cover some of them as we go, but I just want to know that they were there, and if they'll show through whatever area we don't cover with another tree. You can even do, if you wanted to, a whole ridge of them right here by just doing like this. And that just implies that there is a whole bunch of those trees back there, way back there. But for that, you sort of need that dampness in your cards, so that's very important. We're just sort of hinting at shapes of pine trees way in the distance. Okay. Now we're going to do our first foreground tree. And we will grab ultramarine and green, sap green. I want a little bit of that in there. I know they're mostly dark, but I think it needs a little hint of green and some black to make this a fairly, ooh, that's a lot of black. Add some more green. I think I'm going to have to clean my green out and some more ultramarine. I think I need more green. Sap green. Okay. A little more sap green now. Yeah, that's better. Okay, and then a little bit more blue. Okay, I'm happy with that color. Now this guy is further up front, so we will put him right about here, starting there and ending down here. My brush, I can tell, is a little too wet, so I'm tapping it on my paper towel because I don't want a big puddle up here. I want just small tree-like limbs, and we're just going to go back and forth. Keep it dark. You need it dark, not black, but just we've got a little bit of black in there. That's all you want. The blue will darken it. We'll do a different kind of tree in another Christmas card. There's a different kind of tree that I like. It just looks a little different than these, and those are fun. I think it's a spruce, but it just, the limbs are different, the branches are different. It's kind of a cool look. Because of the way the snowbank is, I'm not going to make this perfectly even down here. I'm going to make it sort of go up a little bit and end up here. Like maybe there's some snow on there. And down at the bottom, remember, it fans out a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now when we put the snow on it, it'll look a lot more like it's supposed to, but we have to put in our shadows first. Because I know that's reversed from everything I've told you so far, but when you're using white, then you can put your shadows in first for these trees. When you're using, if you're not using white gouache paint like we have in this set, then you would want to preserve your whites, but that's a lot of trouble, and we don't want to really have to mess with that. So this one is a little bit taller. Try to vary the height of your trees. You don't want them all being exactly the same height. It just doesn't look very natural. I'm going to do the basics here and then come back and work at it so that I know where he sits. He's going to sit just a little bit further back than the other one, but not by much. He's just a little bit bigger. Okay. Okay, he is done. And then we're going to put, remember, 1, 3, 5, 7, odd numbers are better for trees. So we're going to put another tree right here. He's going to be a little bit smaller. Come down to about there. I know we're using white, but the reason that I'm not making the tree completely solid and just saying, well, I can paint white over it, is sometimes it's a little bit hard for the white to cover if you got it too dark. You know, if you got it really, really dark, then the white has a hard time covering the dark colors. So that's why we're trying to leave a little bit of sky where we think we, or a little bit of, yeah, the sky, the background, a little bit of that where we think we're going to be putting snow. Because that snow is going to cover a lot better if it's not a super dark color already. Okay. Now we've got a tree back here that's a little bit more faded maybe. If you want, you can put a smaller, more faded one back here. Okay, there we got 5, so that's a good stopping point right there. Okay. Now we're going to blow dry this. It needs to be very, very dry before we move on to snow. See if I can find my mic. Microphone. Okay. Helps if it's plugged in. Hopefully the computer speakers didn't pick up on me even though I muted my mic. I hope. Okay. Let's see here. What we want to do is get a little bit of fresh white out. Okay, so find that white that's in your Marie's kit that looks like it's marked yellow, because that looks yellow to me, but it does say white. The reason is, even though we have some in our pan, it's dry and it's hard to, like, you really have to work at it to get it thick enough for snowflakes, because it has dried. So it's just easier to grab a fresh little bit since we're dealing with wet paint anyway. And I'm going to grab the finest brush I've got. When that's wet, it's pretty pointy. So whatever the finest one you have is, it may not be exactly like this one, but really want a tight, small point. And I am going to spray this white just a little bit because I don't want it to be pure, and I don't want it to look like it's a impasto effect with acrylics or something. So just about like that. And we're going to start putting some snow on our tree. The snow does not have to look like tree limbs. It can be little, piles. A little bit of that color from the background will bleed through, and that's what you want, because that gives it a little bit of shadows. And you can leave some spots without making it white, because the sky in the background, it'll look like it's a shadow from that sky. I don't know if that made sense the way I said that. Some spots you don't have to put the white, is what I'm trying to explain, because the sky, if I put a little bit on top, for example here, even though you can see the sky peeking through down there, the eye will say, oh, that's the shadow of the snow. So that's what I mean. Just continue putting this down here, all on top of the areas that we left open before. Or even you can, if you saw a spot you're like, oh, I didn't leave enough, you can still put this on top of it and say, well, it belongs right there. Like that guy right there, I had already, it was dark, but I felt like it looked like it needed some right there. I'm bringing this together because that looks a little weird. There we go. Okay. Just keep doing that, putting this on all your trees. It's laying on top of the branches. If you try to think about where you're putting it, think about the snow laying on top of those branches that we made. And the front ones, it's not always side to side, because you have branches up front and they have snow on top of them too. So don't just go this side, this side, this side, this side. There are branches across the middle as well. See, like that? It just makes it look a little more realistic, like a real tree. Okay, do this last one over here. We're almost done with this card. As the white dries, a little bit of that sky color will come through, and be some shadows on it. So I'm not talking a lot because it's late and I'm trying to get it. I'm a little bit tired, but I was downloading some new software to record these videos, and it took a little bit of time to learn how to do it, and so I wanted to make sure I wasn't rushing around tomorrow trying to record these videos, and that I would have it uploaded and ready in time for class, which means I needed to get it done tonight. But I love painting even if it's late at night. Okay, there's our little trees. Now these guys back here, I am going to water down my brush, but I don't want it, I'm just going to put a little bit on them because they're sort of faded, so I don't want it to be bright white. That's why I watered it down a little bit, because they have snow too, obviously. You can't leave them without snow, but we want it to, they're in the distance, so it doesn't need to be bright. And that just means that if I put my, when you water down your white before you put it on, a little bit of the background color soaks in, and that's why that makes it look further out, because the background color bleeds through, is what I'm trying to say, not soaks in, but bleeds through to through your white, and so it looks lighter. And see how that makes them look like they're way back there, because your white isn't that bright. Okay, last thing on this is a little bit of well, not the last thing, but my first closing. We're going to take a brush that's a little bit bigger, maybe that one that we started with, and we're going to put a little bit of shadow underneath the tree. I have a little bit of that color left up here from the shadowy sky, and we're going to bring these trees down to the ground. They need some shadow under them, or they'll look like they're floating. So let's put a little shadow under there. It doesn't have to be real dark. It doesn't have to be spread out. You don't want it as dark as the tree. It's a shadow on the snow, and this will sort of make them sit. Anything that you ever paint, it needs to have some shadow, or it'll look like it's floating in the middle of the air. Whether the shadow is coming off to the side or to the front or right below it, wherever it is, it's got to have a shadow or it's floating. Okay. Now our snowflakes, and for that we don't want it loaded. We just want, there's not a big blob on it, it's still got a fine point. And we're just going to, we don't want to cover our stars, but we just want to put some snowflakes here. And don't forget to put some on top of the tree, the dark areas of the tree, because the snowflakes obviously are not everywhere except in front of the tree. So remember to put those all over. It can be a few or a lot, depending on what you like. If you want a snowstorm, you can put a whole lot of them in there. If you're just trying to hint at the fact that it's a snowy day, we're just throwing a few here. Don't forget to put them on your foreground too. Oops, I got a bead of water on there. It's going to create a problem if that falls in. So your foreground needs to have snowflakes as well. You can make some bigger dots and some smaller dots, and it just makes it look like some are further away and some are closer to you. This is just anywhere. I don't splatter with these, because you could splatter theoretically for snowflakes, but when you do that, you wind up usually with it's not distributed. You wind up with like a streak of snowflakes. Like if I tried to splatter snowflakes on here, I'd probably have like a streak that went straight up the middle of snowflakes and nothing to either side. So I find that even though this is just a little time consuming, we're only talking about like maybe 3 or 4 minutes, so It's not like it's a huge amount of time, but it looks a lot more natural than trying to splatter it, even though splattering may sound easier. I don't think it looks very real. I think it's much easier. I'm just moving my wrist so that there's no distinct pattern here. I'm just sort of putting it down. Remember to put it on the tree because he's got snowflakes coming down in front of him. I think that's it. I think we can call her done. So I'll post this on there so you guys can see it. And we will see you in class tomorrow. I'm going to do a couple of little clouds tomorrow morning for you before class and show you different cloudy skies that you can do. It won't be a whole painting. It's just going to be kind of how to do clouds, so that when you want to do something and you're trying to do a sky for it, you will know some of the techniques for different types of clouds. So there you go. There's a Christmas card, and you can vary it any way you want. Bluer, redder, blacker, midnight blue, pink, red, whatever you want.